Hello my bookish lovelies, Kira here, and today I'm going to be talking about all of my most favorite reads from 2019. Of books in 2019, so it was kind of hard for me to narrow it down, but I tried to narrow it down the best I could with the top books from 2019. So what kind of discussion would this be if I did not first bring up Missborne by Brandon Sanderson? I had heard nothing but amazing things about this the entire time people were talking about this book, and every time I mentioned it, people were telling me that I had to read it. So I finally got around to reading it, and it was definitely worth it. Like, I loved the series. Now, I will say, like, in this, it's a trilogy, and in this trilogy, the first one was not my favorite, but the second and third one were absolutely incredible, and they really, like, took the story, like, at full force. I mean, basically, this is a book, like, this very first book sets everything up. This is about a young girl named Vin who is able to burn metals. She's a Missborne. In this world, the magic system, there's different types of metals, and Mistings can burn one metal and get one ability from that particular metal. Their body is not equipped to burn all metals. Missborns, on the other hand, are equipped to burn all of the metals and get all of the abilities, and those are a lot rarer. It's a lot more common to be a Misting. Vin, a young girl, has this uncanny ability, and she is a Missborne, and she meets this guy named Kelsier and finds a friend-made family. That trope is big in this. There's so many wonderful characters. I love Breeze. Like, Breeze was one of my all-time favorite characters. Sazed is one of my all-time favorite characters. There's a lot of characters in this to love, and this book series itself, not just the first book, but the entire series just really stands out for me. And I have to say, like, that this is not a series like that I will soon be forgetting, because this actually put me into a fantasy slump, and I've never been in a fantasy slump before. Like, it was just, it's not like me. And so, like, for like the next month and a half after I read this book, like, I was reading almost nothing but contemporary books because I was trying to not be so hardcore hungover with this series. I absolutely love this series. It is definitely worth it. If you like fantasy, if you like epic fantasy, these books are definitely for you. The next book that I really enjoyed is The Sun Is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon. This is another book that I was kept hearing that I had to read. Everybody was saying how amazing this standalone book is, and basically, this is about a girl named Natasha who's getting ready to be deported back to Jamaica. And because she's getting ready to be deported, she's rushing forward to the immigration office trying to figure out how to prevent that from happening after her father gets a DUI. And they realize that he's an illegal citizen. Him and his whole family end up getting deported. On her way to the immigration office, she runs into this guy named Daniel who is Korean. So Natasha is this really scientific, really cynical person about love, and Daniel is this really poetic, very passionate person who believes at love at first sight. This entire book pretty much takes place in the span of a day, and it is kind of insta-lovey, but it does it in such a way that I could never be bothered by this, because she is fighting things the whole time. Like, you know, you see this internal struggle for her the whole time. But with Daniel, you kind of see him falling for her and just being completely enamored with her. And so he is the emotional to her logic, and it's two sides of the same coin. And I believe, like, that the dynamic in this is something that everybody goes through. We all have a little Daniel in our back of our minds who's telling us that romance is not dead. And then we all have a Natasha in the back of our minds as well, like, that is telling us that love is dead. So I feel like this is, like, such a dynamic and written in such a way that I feel like could be either Natasha or a Daniel at any given time. A lot of times we probably could be both. So I really like how this captured love just so perfectly, and it did it with a scientific kind of spin on it. This is a beautiful book, and I really highly recommend this one. This is definitely one of my favorite reads for 2019. The next book that I'm going to discuss with you is Heroine by Mindy McGinnis. It's about a young all-star baseball player named Mickey who is in her senior year of high school, and she loves baseball. Her entire social standing has to do with her baseball, and she ends up getting into a car accident and ends up hurting her hip pretty badly. Well, she's going to be off of her feet for a lot longer than she hopes, and so she starts getting into taking painkillers. And as time progresses, the painkillers become less and less and less helpful to her. And she ends up going down the rabbit hole and she starts on heroin. This is a contemporary book about drugs. This is a very intense book. There is a lot of trigger warnings for drug use, murder, death. Lots of things go on in this book that are just really, really, really intense. And I do strongly caution you before you enter in this book. But this was also a very realistic book too. Mindy McGinnis actually interviewed a lot of drug addicts before she started writing this. And I felt like this really captured what it meant to be a drug addict. People are not born drug addicts. Like, they don't start out that way typically. But this really had to do like with how somebody who was into sports and had everything going for them could end up getting into drugs. And I feel like the reason why she picked a character like this is because she was trying to send the message that it could happen to anyone. I really loved this book because it just felt so raw and so real, and at times like it was very disturbing and very hard to read, but I feel like that's kind of on brand for Mindy McGinnis. So I do really love this book, and this is another book that has really stood out in my mind. The next book that is on this list is actually not quite a book. It's a graphic novel series called Monstrous by Marjorie M. Liu. Not only is the illustrations for this absolutely breathtaking, but this book is these graphic novels are actually very intense, and they are it's a fantasy horror series, and it's brilliant. Like, it's absolutely brilliant. This is really the story of a teenage girl who is inhabited by a monster, and right at the beginning we see that she has her arm from here up. She has her other full arm, but apparently what happened was that she went to sleep, and because there was no people around, the monster needed to feed, so the monster ended up eating her arm, basically. The monster lives inside of her, so technically she ended up eating her own arm. It sounds really morbid, and it kind of is, and there's a lot of morbid stuff in this book, but there's also a lot of things going on, like a lot of ancient gods and a lot of ghosts. I can't tell you how amazing the series is. You just have to read it. Like, there's so much to the series and so much world building, and it's still going. Like, this is an ongoing series, and I'm really looking forward to more of this in the books ahead. So if you guys like fantasy and horror and just really intense, you know, like world building, this graphic novel series is definitely for you. It's stunning and amazing and brilliant, and I cannot gush about this enough because you just gotta read it. The next book that I absolutely adored from 2019 is The Devouring Grey by Christine Lynn Herman. This book was another brilliant one. This is about 4 teens from 4 descendant families at 4 Paths, which is the name of the small town. This is also around a really dark fog that if you go out into the fog, chances are you won't be coming back, and it's been getting worse. For the longest time, there's like a lot of lore, you know, around these 4 families, these 4 founding families that each have special abilities to protect 4 paths, and so like they're very much well respected. But the problem is that normally the Devouring Grey only takes 1 person a year. Normally this is how it goes, but now like the Devouring Grey has taken multiple people in this year alone, and things are not holding up the way that they used to. So something is going wrong here. This book is also geared towards YA, and it is another amazing book that I read. It's also got LGBTQ+ rep in it as well, which I really love that, because like these kinds of books, you know, fantasy, horror, thriller, that kind of thing, you don't like really see a ton of LGBTQ+ representation in those kind of books, and I'm really glad that we have that in this. This is actually the first, I believe it's going to be a duology, like we're still waiting on the second one to come out, but I am so excited. This book had me at the edge of my seat, especially towards the end. Like, I just had to know what was going to happen, and ever since like I read this book, like I've just been really obsessed with it. I'm really anxiously awaiting for her to come out with the next book, but I really don't want to say too much because a lot of the lore, a lot of discovery of the history of these 4 founding families is a mystery, and it's not something that you learn all at once, and it's something that you learn along the way. So I'm going to leave the rest of that to mystery. All I can say is that read this book, Devouring Grey by Christine Lynn Herman, because it is phenomenal and I love it. The next book that I read that I loved in 2019 is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. I had actually watched the movie before I read this book, and they are 2 entirely different things. So this was a book that's situated in the year 2044 when things and the economy sucks. There's actually a 2-year waiting list to get a job at McDonald's. Everything is just really bad. Like, people have to have an escape, and they do the escape through a game called The Oasis, where pretty much everybody is plugged into, and it is a free game. Now, the equipment for the game itself is not free, but the access to the game is. We meet a kid named Wade Watts, who is in high school, and he actually goes to school in the Oasis, which is actually a huge difference between the book and the movie, because by the time we get to him in the movie, he is actually above high school age. He is a Gunther. He's trying to find all of the clues that he can to try to unlock Holiday, who is the creator of the Oasis, all 3 keys that he needs to get the grand prize. And people have been hunting for this grand prize for years. I listened to this on audiobook. Actually, the audiobook is narrated by Will Wheaton, and I binged this audiobook. This is really amazing. Like, this is so good. It's actually pretty different from the movie itself. So if you watch the movie and you want a whole different experience in the same world, I do recommend Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. I know, like, this is not going to be everybody's cup of tea because there are some conflicting things about this, but I know that I really enjoyed it, and this ended up being one of my all-time favorite books. Like, I really thought this was just such an incredible book. Okay, guys, are you guys ready for the next one? I am waiting for you guys all to be 100% shocked with this one. Drum roll, please. Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco, because, you know, not on brand or anything. This is the first in a series. They just completed the series this year, and I adore it. Like, I just think so highly of it. This is about a young woman in the early 1800s named Audrey Rose. And she is going to a forensic science school, and right from the get-go, when they begin this book, she is opening up a cadaver. And in the 1800s, it is pretty much unheard of for a woman to open up a dead body or to be involved in anything that is not having to do with socializing and finding a husband. So she is definitely an exception to the rule back in the 1800s. Her father does not know that this is happening, but her uncle does, and he's the one that's running the school for the forensic science, and he's the one who is allowing her to learn about all the forensic science stuff. So there's a murderer in town, and he's been cutting open women. They call him Jack the Ripper. One of the greatest things about these books is that they incorporate actual facts from history about these serial killers. I love that because though they are not 100% factually accurate, they are close enough like that you can learn a lot about serial killers by reading these books, because towards the end she actually does go through, she has a couple pages pretty much at the end of every book acknowledging the changes that she made and the things like that she left the same out of conveniences for the main characters. This has also got a little bit of a romance in it with Thomas Cresswell, and we love Thomas Cresswell. Like, Thomas Cresswell is like everything. He kind of gives me like that Sherlock Holmes vibe, but like less sociopath and like more, you know, actual warm human being. Don't get me wrong, I actually love Sherlock Holmes, especially the ones like with Benedict Cumberbatch, but I really love all the vibes, like all the dark spooky vibes that this has, and it's just brilliant and amazing. And if you are even slightly interested in historical fiction, this is a great read. The next book that I decided to put into this is The Whale and the Wolf by Jordana Max Brodsky. I do have a complete review for this. I'll link that in the corner. This was another one. This was a hell of a ride. This is about a young girl named Omat, and actually from the beginning we do not know that Omat is a girl. We only discover later on that Omat is a girl because Omat is learning how to be a shaman and a hunter. They actually live like in very cold regions. They're Eskimos, and so in their religion, women are not allowed to hunt because it could anger the gods. Well, Omat is allowed to hunt because she's never quite become a true woman in the sense like that everything like that, you know, like women, all the things that our bodies do, her body's not doing. So she ends up being allowed to hunt, and she is also learning how to be a shaman from her grandfather, who is also a shaman. This actually is an amazing combination between not only the gods of Omat's tribe, who have to do a lot like with the sun and the moon and the water and pretty much everything in their habitat. It also combines Vikings into this as well. And This was an extremely amazing journey. Oh, I love this book. This is a standalone book, and I'd heard so many things about it, but like this is another like one I can't gush on enough because it's absolutely brilliant. I absolutely adore it. I love it. Especially like if you like, you know, books like that are kind of like a journey, like a harsh journey, like a survival thing. And this came to me like right at the right time in my life because I loved learning about her tribe and her, and this does have trigger warnings for rape. Like, it's a very intense book, and it is actually classified as an adult book, adult historical fiction, but it's definitely worth it. It's amazing, and I do recommend this one as well. I love it so much. I could tell you I love this book a million times and it still wouldn't be enough. So another book that I had to put on here is Ziggy Stardust and Me by James Brandon. This is another historical fiction book, but it's not set that far in the past. It's in 1973. And Jonathan is this young boy who's been going to counseling for quite a long time because his father and pretty much society in general believes that there's something wrong with him. The fact that he's interested in boys in 1973 is a very taboo thing. I did do a full review on this one as well, kind of digging in more to everything that surrounds this book, and oh my god, this was definitely a hard read because of all of the stigma and blatant, you know, homophobia and racism and everything else that was going on in this time. But what I really loved about it is that it kind of also talks about how music helped him to survive and how fantastical the music was back then, because there was so much escapism involved that people were actually escaping through the theatrics of music as well. So this was a really amazing book. Jonathan ends up meeting this boy named Webb. Webb is a Native American Indian that comes from Nevada, and Jonathan and Webb end up meeting. In Webb's tribe, being gay is perfectly acceptable, and they actually believe like that if you're gay, like you actually have special abilities, which was really enlightening for Jonathan. Jonathan is still really trying to reject himself because everything that he's learned about being gay is wrong, and society has told him that being gay is wrong. But the only place that he really feels at home is with Webb. This is such a beautiful story. It's at times very hard to digest, but I do highly recommend this one. This is another one that I adored during 2019. The next book that I have to talk about is One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was another amazing book. Actually, out of a lot of the other, I read pretty much everything Taylor Jenkins Reid had written, like between last year and this year, and I loved this book. This was really amazing. This is all about Emma Blair, who is a high school student when we start this book, and she ends up marrying her high school sweetheart. And her and her high school sweetheart move to California to become travel journalists. Well, just before their first wedding anniversary, Jesse, her husband, decides to go to Alaska because he's never been before, and his plane crashes and goes down, and everybody believes that he's dead. Emma is absolutely heartbroken. She ends up moving back home because she's just not a functioning human being at this point because she's just so devastated. She has to learn how to be a different person, or be a person living without the love of her life. Once she moves back, she ends up running into a guy named Sam, who's a music teacher. It was another guy that she knew in high school that her and him had never quite gotten a chance to connect romantically. But now that she's starting to heal from having a devastating loss, her and Sam connect and begin a relationship. About a year down the line, she gets a phone call from Jesse saying that he is alive and that he's going to be coming home. This is about two loves, being in love with one person at one time in your life and being in love with another person another time in your life. This book is by far and above very difficult as far as, you know, like the material that we're dealing with, but it's also very eye-opening because it really defines like that you can be one person at one time in your life and love that person, and then you change and then you can love another person another time in your life. And this book really does an amazing job of capturing that, and it was very eye-opening. I got everything I wanted out of this book. Like, I had a set hope in my mind about how this book was going to progress, and it progressed exactly that way. So I love this book. The next book that I have to discuss, I actually read towards the beginning of 2019, but this is actually really stood out for me as well. This was, I believe, one of the very first science fiction books that I read in 2019, and it was amazing. It was about this mentally disabled guy named Charlie, and he was going through a series of science experiments trying to increase his intelligence. He was also participating in a school during the day to kind of try to learn things. He had just recently learned how to read. Charlie's in his 30s, and so, like, you know, the fact that he just recently learned how to read is showing how slow he has developed mentally. He also works at a restaurant cleaning up, and then he goes through a procedure that is supposed to increase his intelligence. I really liked how this was written, especially at first, because he was actually writing the book. It's all told like as if he is writing the book himself, and so the spelling is not good, and it kind of is a little bit hard to read at the beginning, but as time goes on and his intelligence becomes better and better and better, so does his ability to perceive things. And as time goes on, he also realizes that he is actually getting made fun of at the place that he works. He, at the beginning of this book, believed everyone to be his friend. Like, he thought like everything was just dandy, like that his life was perfect. And then as time went on, like, and he became more intelligent, he kind of awakened to the fact that everything was not okay and that people were not treating him right. It was really heartbreaking because as somebody, like, you know, viewing this from the outside and the descriptions he gave, you know, as the reader, that the things that these people are doing to him are wrong. But he doesn't know that, and there's just like this blissful innocence that has to do with him before he starts gaining intelligence. This is such an exploration of not only intelligence, but the human condition itself, and it's definitely considered a science fiction classic, and there's reasons for that. It was gorgeous, it was beautifully written, it was also extremely heartbreaking. It's really not that long of a book, it's not very thick at all, but like, it was definitely an experience, and it's another one that I find very, very memorable. The last book that I have to discuss is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. What's to be said about this book? This is a science fiction thriller, and it is just, it's great. Like, I really, really love this book. Jason Dezen is a high school science teacher. He had everything going for him when he was in college. He had a scholarship, and then he met the love of his life, and he would rather settle down and get married and have a child with the love of his life rather than being a high-profile scientist. His best friend actually ended up becoming a high-profile scientist, and one night Jason goes to visit his friend at a bar, and then on his way home Jason is abducted and put to sleep. Once Jason wakes up, he is in a different reality from the one he knew before. And it's kind of like got an element of mystery to it. You're kind of, you know, trying to figure out where this guy is, and he's just trying to explore, you know, what has happened to him, why he's like in this place that he's in. And this is a science fiction mystery thriller that does an excellent job of the content in it, and this was another one that I just really enjoyed a lot. This is another also very hyped science fiction thriller, and I really loved it, and I love the experience of reading it. And if you guys like science fiction thrillers, like, this book is not hyped without reason. Like, this is hyped for a very good reason because it's amazing. Well guys, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you guys like this video. If you guys like this video, hit the little like, hit subscribe, and hit the little bell icon if you guys want to receive emails every time I post. If you guys have any books that you guys really loved throughout 2019, please tell me down in the comments, what books did you really love in 2019? What are your favorites? What were your least favorites? Tell me, I would like to know. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys again very soon.